The envelope
Look,
from
sweetie, our
Seashore
new
Bank
home.
and Trust
It's
had
beautiful,
been
Mommy.
sitting on
Let's
Stella
go inside.
Merriweather's kitchen table for 3 days. She had not opened it. She already knew what it said. 60 days. That was all she had before the bank would take back the small two-bedroom house she and Kelvin had bought with such careful hope 7 years ago, back when hope still felt like something a person could afford. She stood at the kitchen counter with her coffee, her back to the table, watching the morning light move across the linoleum floor. The house in Harwich, Pennsylvania, was quiet in the way that houses become quiet after someone is taken from them. Not peaceful, just absent. Kelvin had been gone for 2 years, killed in a machinery accident at the fabrication plant on Route 16, and in those 2 years Stella had learned that grief does not get smaller. It simply becomes the room you live in. Her wedding ring was still on her left hand. She had not made a decision about that yet. The job at Darla's gift shop downtown paid enough to keep the lights on and Clem fed and the car running most months. It did not pay enough for a mortgage that had been designed for 2 incomes. The notices had been arriving since last spring, each one a little more serious than the last, each one sitting unopened a little longer before Stella finally made herself read it. She heard Clem before she saw her, the small footsteps coming down the hallway, the pause at the kitchen doorway. She turned. Clem stood in the frame of the door, wearing a black dress. She was 8 years old, dark-haired, like Kelvin, with Kelvin's blue eyes that Stella could never quite look at directly without something tightening in her chest. The dress was the one Clem had worn to Kelvin's funeral 2 years ago. It had been the right length then. Now it fell 4 inches short of her knees, and the buttons at the collar strained slightly where Clem had grown through the shoulders. Clem looked down at herself with a child's honest uncertainty. Mom, is this okay to wear to Grandma Rosalind's funeral? Stella set her coffee down. She looked at her daughter standing there in that too short dress, and something cracked open quietly behind her sternum. 8 years old, and Clem Merriweather had already worn funeral clothes more than most grown women. She had already learned the particular weight of a room where someone was missing. "Come here," Stella said. "Let me fix those buttons." She crossed the kitchen and knelt in front of her daughter, working the small buttons with steady hands she had trained to be steady. Clem stood still and let her. Outside, the September sky over Harwich was the color of old pewter, and the oak trees along the street had begun their slow annual surrender. "Mum," Clem said quietly, "do you think Grandma Rosalind went to the same place as Dad?" Stella kept her eyes on the buttons. "I do, sweetheart. I really do. Do you think they know each other?" "I think they're probably already talking." Clem considered this with the gravity that 8-year-olds bring to large questions. Then she nodded satisfied and reached up to straighten her collar herself. Stella stood. Behind her on the kitchen table, the envelope from Seashore Bank and Trust waited with its 60 days and its clean white edges and its absolute indifference to everything that was happening in this kitchen. She picked up her coffee again, left the envelope where it was, and went to get her coat. Before she could leave for the funeral, she had one stop to make. She had called Darla the night before to ask for 2 days of personal leave, and Darla had said they would talk about it in the morning. That meant Stella needed to go to the shop before heading to Pinewood Memorial Gardens. Darla was already behind the counter when Stella arrived, pulling inventory sheets from a binder with the focused efficiency of a woman who believed that problems could be managed if you organized them correctly. She was 62 years old and had run the shop for 20 years, and was in most respects a decent employer. She had given Stella a job 3 weeks after Kelvin's accident without making her interview for it. She had advanced Stella 2 months of salary the winter after that, when the pipes froze and the repair bill came in at $400 over what Stella had saved. But Darla also operated a small business in a small town where the Summerfield family had deep roots, and roots had a way of reaching into unexpected places. She looked up when Stella came in. Her expression was careful, not unkind, but prepared. "I need to talk to you before you go," Darla said. "I only have a few minutes. The service starts at 10. Darla set down the binder and folded her hands on the counter. "Larkin Summerfield called me last night. He asked about Rosalind, about the times she came in here in the last year, whether I thought she seemed confused or disoriented." She paused. "I didn't have a choice, Stella. He's connected to the landlord on this building. My lease is up in February." The shop was very quiet. The little ceramic wind chimes near the door shifted slightly in the draft from the heating vent. "You signed something for his lawyer," Stella said. It was not a question. Darla did not look away, but her hands tightened slightly on the counter. "I told them what I observed, that Rosalind came in twice and seemed uncertain about what she was looking for, that she repeated herself." She took a careful breath. "I'm sorry, Stella. I genuinely am, but I have staff who depend on this shop. I can't risk the lease." Stella stood there for a moment, looking at the woman who had given her a job when she had needed one badly, who had advanced her salary without being asked, who was now standing in her own shop, telling her that she had provided ammunition to Larkin Summerfield for whatever legal action he was planning against Rosalind's estate. "You can't apologize to me for this, Darla," Stella said quietly. "Rosalind Summerfield was 92 years old, and she came into this shop by herself and bought gifts for people she loved. Whatever Larkin asked you to say about her, that's what she actually was." She picked up her purse. "If you want to apologize to someone, apologize to her." She walked out without waiting for a response and did not look back. Pinewood Memorial Gardens sat on a gentle hill at the eastern edge of Harwich, surrounded by old oaks that were already half bare in the early September cool. Stella parked near the iron gate and helped Clem out of the car, and took her daughter's hand, and they walked together up the gravel path toward the canopy that had been set up near the back of the grounds. She saw Larkin and Jacinda before they saw her. They were standing with a cluster of relatives near the rows of folding chairs, and even from a distance there was something in their posture that was not quite grief. Larkin Summerfield was 61, broad-shouldered, with the particular confidence of a man who had made money in real estate and believed that making money was evidence of a certain kind of rightness. His sister Jacinda was 58, tailored, and contained her arms folded across her chest in a way that looked less like sorrow and more like a board meeting. They were speaking quietly. Stella caught fragments as she approached along the path. Jacinda's voice carried just enough to reach her. "Word is, Rosalind cut her out completely." Larkin's response was lower, but his expression was not. He was not looking at the grave or the flowers or the people around him. He was looking at something in the middle distance with the focused, calculating attention of a man running numbers. Stella tightened her grip on Clem's hand and walked past them without stopping. The service was what small-town funerals often are, sincere in its intentions, slightly inadequate to the actual person being mourned. Rosalind Summerfield's friends from her church and her neighborhood said the right things and dabbed at their eyes with folded handkerchiefs. The minister spoke about a long life well lived. A neighbor described Rosalind's peppermint candy dish and her bird feeders. None of them knew what Stella did not yet fully know herself, that Rosalind Summerfield had spent the last years of her life driving 40 minutes out to a cabin in the woods alone, cataloging objects that told the stories of people who had otherwise been forgotten, that she had been maintaining something enormous in secret with the patience and precision of someone who understood that the most important work is often the most invisible. Clem pressed against Stella's side throughout the service. At one point she whispered, "She smelled like peppermint and old books." Stella looked down at her. "How did you know that?" Clem thought about it. "I just remember from the last time we saw her." Stella pulled Clem a little closer and did not say anything. Afterward, as the small crowd began to move toward their cars, Jacinda materialized at Stella's elbow with the seamless approach of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. "The reading is at 2, Jacinda said. Her tone was precisely calibrated civil, but not warm efficient, but not rude. "Peterson's office. You don't need to be there, of course. It's just a formality." "I'll be there," Stella said. Something flickered in Jacinda's expression. Not surprise exactly, more like a calculation being revised. "Of course," Jacinda said and moved away. The law offices of Peterson and Associates occupied the second floor of the oldest brick building in downtown Harwich, a three-story structure that had been built in 1887 and had the smell of every decade since furniture oiled old carpet, the particular mustiness of documents that had been stored and retrieved and stored again across generations. The waiting room had leather chairs whose seams had cracked with age, and a grandfather clock in the corner that ticked with the unhurried confidence of something that expected to outlast everyone in the room. Larkin and Jacinda had arrived first and taken seats at the center of the long oak conference table. Two cousins Stella barely recognized sat on one side. An elderly woman from Rosalind's church sat near the door looking slightly overwhelmed. And then there was Darla. She was seated against the wall, not at the table, holding a manila folder on her lap with both hands. She was not a family member. She had no reason to be at the reading of Rosalind Summerfield's will, except one reason, and that reason was sitting across the table with his fingers laced together and his expression arranged into something that was meant to look like dignified grief. Stella sat at the far end of the table and set Clem up with her sketchbook and colored pencils, and did not look at Darla again. Peterson was a thin man in his late 70s whose reading glasses slid continuously down the bridge of his nose as he arranged his papers with the methodical precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times and believed that ceremony mattered even when no one else did. He cleared his throat. He thanked them all for coming. He said that Rosalind Summerfield had been a valued client for more than 40 years and that he was honored to carry out her final wishes. Larkin sat forward almost imperceptibly in his chair. The reading proceeded in the orderly fashion of Rosalind's careful planning. Her jewelry collection went to Jacinda. The antique silver service went to Cousin Margaret. The 2011 Buick to Larkin. A selection of framed photographs to the church. Small bequests to several neighbors. Then Peterson adjusted his glasses and turned a page. "To my granddaughter Stella Merriweather," he read in the same measured tone he had used for everything else. "I leave the property located at 156 Pine Hollow Road, commonly referred to as the Summerfield cabin, along with all contents therein. This transfer requires only a nominal payment of $1 with all property taxes paid through the end of the current calendar year. The room went quiet. Jacinda broke it first with a short sound that was almost a laugh. The old cabin, that worthless shack in the woods. She shook her head slightly, as though confirming something she had already suspected. Larkin said nothing. Stella watched him. He was looking at Peterson's papers with an expression that was not anger and was not relief. It was the expression of a man who has received information he was expecting and who is already thinking about what to do with it. "There is one additional item," Peterson said. He reached for a cream-colored envelope at the side of his papers and slid it across the table. "Your grandmother asked that I give this to you personally after the formal reading." The envelope moved across the polished oak and stopped in front of Stella. Her name was on the front, in Rosalind's handwriting. The letters were slightly unsteady, the way handwriting becomes in the final years, but the penmanship itself was unmistakably precise. Rosalind Summerfield had learned to write in an era when handwriting was considered a reflection of character, and even at 92 her letters had a particular elegance. Stella picked up the envelope with both hands. She became aware at the edge of her vision that Larkin was watching the envelope, not her, the envelope. "Is there anything further?" Larkin asked, his voice cordial and entirely controlled. "Some of us have other commitments this afternoon." Peterson shook his head. The reading was concluded. The relatives dispersed with the brisk efficiency of people who had gotten what they came for and were ready to move on to the next thing. Jacinda was already on her phone before she reached the door. Larkin paused beside his sister, and the two of them exchanged a few words in low voices before leaving together without speaking to Stella or acknowledging Clem, who was still quietly drawing in her sketchbook, as though none of this had anything to do with her. It was only in the car with the doors closed and the parking lot of Peterson's building quiet around them that Stella opened the envelope. She unfolded a single sheet of Rosalind's personal stationery. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the kind that had been expensive once and had been kept in a drawer for the right occasion. The writing was Rosalind's careful, despite the slight tremor. "Stella, my dearest, this cabin holds more secrets than anyone realizes. When you are ready, look carefully at the floor. Trust no one until you know the whole truth. All my love, Rosalind." Below the signature, drawn in ink with the deliberate care of someone who wanted to make sure it was accurate, was a small symbol. A key rendered simply in a few clean lines with a five-pointed star at its base. And taped to the bottom of the page, attached with a small piece of yellowed cellophane tape, was an iron key, old, heavy for its size. The bow of the key, where a finger would hold it, had been shaped in a way that Stella had not seen in a key before. The metal there formed a small five-pointed star, matching the drawing exactly. Clem leaned over from the passenger seat, looking. She traced the star in the drawing with one careful finger. "What does it mean?" she asked. Stella looked at the key for a long time. She looked at the drawing. She thought about the way Larkin had watched this envelope travel across the conference table. "I think we need to go visit this cabin," she said. She had a stop to make first. In the morning before they drove out, she went to the gift shop one final time. She had made a decision overnight, and she wanted it to be clean. Darla was opening the front register when Stella came in. She looked up with the expression of someone who had spent the night preparing for a difficult conversation. "I'm taking leave," Stella said. "I don't know for how long. I'm going out to look at the cabin Rosalind left me." Darla set down the cash tray. Stella, about yesterday. I want you to know that I told Larkin's people only what I actually observed. I didn't exaggerate." "I know you didn't, Darla." Stella kept her voice even. "And I know why you did it. I'm not angry with you." But Rosalind Summerfield was a sharp, clear-minded woman who knew exactly what she was doing until the end of her life, and whatever Larkin intends to do with your statement, it isn't going to reflect well on either of you when the truth comes out. She paused. "If you want to apologize to someone, apologize to her, not me." She walked out and did not look back, and this time she meant it as something final. Not cruel, final. The drive to Pine Hollow Road took 40 minutes and ended at a gravel path so narrow and so well concealed by the flanking pines that Stella drove past it twice before the GPS insisted she had arrived. The path wound through a dense stand of conifers for about a quarter-mile before opening into a small clearing at the forest's edge. The cabin was there. It was not the ruin that Jacinda had implied in her quick dismissal. It was weathered, certainly. The logs that formed its walls had silvered with decades of weather into the particular gray of old timber, beautiful in its way, the way very old things can be beautiful when they have been allowed to age honestly. The covered porch that wrapped around two sides had settled unevenly, one corner dipping slightly toward the ground, but the structure was intact. The windows were clouded with grime, but unbroken. The stone chimney rose from the roofline, solid and straight, capped with a rusted cover that had kept the birds out. It had been built by a man who knew how to build things that lasted. Rain had started on the drive out, a steady gray drizzle that pattered on the pine needles and turned the clearing's dirt to soft mud. Stella and Clem ran from the car to the covered porch, and Stella stood at the heavy wooden door with the iron key, half expecting the lock to resist. It did not. The key turned with an ease that surprised her, as though the mechanism had been maintained. The door swung inward on quiet hinges. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and cold wood and something underneath both of those things, something older, like the accumulated presence of a family over generations. The main room opened before them, dominated by a massive stone fireplace on the far wall. The furniture was mismatched and worn, a leather sofa cracked with age, two armchairs in different fabrics, a dining table with 4 chairs arranged as though awaiting a meal that had been delayed for decades. Dust lay on every surface, but no animals had gotten in. No water damage showed on the ceiling. The structure was entirely sound. Stella swept her flashlight across the room and stopped on the mantelpiece. Photographs, a long row of them in different frames arranged with obvious care. The black and white image of a young man in military uniform, his expression solemn and direct beneath his service cap. Beside it, Rosalind as a young woman, dark-haired and bright-eyed, smiling at something outside the frame. A man in fishing gear, with a creel over his shoulder, whom Stella recognized from other photographs as her grandfather James, a series of family gatherings from across decades, and at the center of the row, in a silver frame that was better than the others, a wedding photograph. Stella and Kelvin standing together outside a church, Stella in her dress and Kelvin in his rented suit, both of them squinting into the sun with the particular expression of people who cannot quite believe their luck. Rosalind had kept it here, in this place that she had never mentioned in this room, that no one else had entered for years. She had kept their wedding photograph in the place of honor. Clem found it at the same moment and went very still beside her. They moved through the rest of the cabin, quietly learning its dimensions. A small kitchen with an ancient gas range and a refrigerator from the 1980s. A narrow hallway leading to 2 bedrooms, each with a handmade quilt on the bed, each quilt in a different pattern but made from the same quality of stitching. A bathroom that improbably appeared to have been updated sometime in the last 20 years, with a functioning toilet and a shower with modern fixtures. Rosalind had not simply left this place to the years. She had been maintaining it, selectively, deliberately. They spent the afternoon cleaning what they could with the supplies Stella had brought, opening windows to move the stale air despite the drizzle, beating the dust from the quilts and hanging them on the porch rail. Stella found a generator in a small shed behind the cabin and spent an hour learning its workings before managing to start it, which brought the lights on and revealed the interior in full for the first time. Clem discovered the fireplace was functional and the woodpile beside the cabin was dry, and by evening they had a fire going and had eaten sandwiches from the cooler and were sitting together on the leather sofa, watching the flames. "Did Grandma Rosalind live here?" Clem asked. "I don't think she lived here. I think she came here to work on something." "What kind of work?" "I don't know yet." Clem was quiet for a moment. The note she left said to look at the floor. "I know. Should we look now?" "Tomorrow," Stella said, "when we have better light and I'm not exhausted from driving and running a generator." Clem accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who has learned that some things require waiting. She fell asleep against Stella's shoulder before the fire had burned down an hour, and Stella sat in the quiet cabin with her daughter's weight against her side and the iron key in her hand and the dancing light-making shadows on the old log walls. She was still holding the key when she heard the first sound. It came from the porch, a footstep, one careful step on old wood, followed by a deliberate silence, followed by another step. Not an animal. The rhythm was wrong for an animal. This was a person, moving with intentional quiet, testing each board before committing their weight to it. Stella did not move. She listened. Clem slept on against her shoulder, entirely unaware. The footsteps moved along the porch to the side of the cabin. Then a new sound, metal against glass. Someone trying the window latch from outside, testing it, probing the resistance of the old lock. Stella set Clem down on the sofa with careful gentleness and stood. She crossed to the fireplace and picked up the iron poker from the stand beside the hearth. It was cold and heavy and real in her hand. The sound at the window continued for another 30 seconds. Then it stopped. A long silence. Then distantly the sound of a car engine starting somewhere down the gravel road, retreating into the night. Stella waited 10 minutes before she moved. She checked every window and door. She found what she had expected to find on the side window near the latch, a fresh gouge in the wooden frame where something metal had been worked against the lock. Whoever had been there was skilled enough to make the attempt quietly and smart enough to leave when it did not immediately succeed. Someone had known they were here. Someone had come on the very first night. She did not sleep for the rest of that night. She sat in the armchair nearest the door with the poker across her lap, and the fire burning low, and Clem breathing softly on the sofa, and she thought about the way Larkin Summerfield had watched that cream-colored envelope travel across Peterson's conference table. Morning came with sun and birdsong and the kind of clarity that follows a night of watching. Clem woke refreshed and immediately purposeful. Can we look at the floor now? They started in the main room, moving methodically. Clem had invented a game of tapping her fingers along the boards, as though playing a piano, and it was this game, this casual percussion moving across the old pine, that found it. About 3 feet from the north wall the sound changed. Where the rest of the floor produced a solid thud, this section returned a hollow resonance, the unmistakable difference between wood backed by earth and wood backed by empty space. "Mom," Clem looked up. "Listen." Stella knelt and knocked on the boards herself. The difference was undeniable. She ran her fingers along the seam where the hollow section met the solid floor, and found what she was looking for only when the morning light hit at precisely the right angle, a nearly invisible rectangle, approximately 3 feet by 4 feet, the edges cut with such precision that they had been invisible in any other light. She retrieved the iron key from the window sill where she had left it. She turned it in her hands, examining the star-shaped bow, the way Rosalind's note had prompted her to look at the floor. Then she moved along the baseboard beneath the north wall, running her fingers over the old wood. Behind the armchair, almost entirely hidden by the chair's leg, she found a small star carved into the wood, identical to the one on the key. She pressed the surrounding area, and a small panel opened barely an inch, revealing a keyhole. She inserted Rosalind's key. The click was quiet and final, like the last piece of something falling into place. She pushed on the rectangular section of flooring, and it rose. Hinged from one edge, counterweighted, somehow it lifted with a smoothness that suggested careful engineering. Below it, a wooden staircase descended into darkness. The smell that rose was old and cool and enclosed, not unpleasant, but deeply familiar in the way that basements and attics and long-ceiled rooms carry the particular atmosphere of stopped time. Clem pressed against her mother's side. "A secret basement," she breathed. Stella aimed her flashlight down the stairs. Stone walls. A packed earth floor about 8 feet below. The beam caught the edge of something in the far corner, a shelf, something on it, more shelves, more somethings. She tested the first stair. Solid. She tested the second. "Stay right behind me," she told Clem. "Hold the railing. Step where I step." They descended together. What the flashlight revealed when they reached the bottom stopped Stella where she stood. The room was approximately 15 feet square. The walls were stone mortared with the same skill that had built the cabin above. Along 3 walls, wooden shelving had been installed with the precision of a craftsman who intended it to last level, well supported, fitted exactly to the dimensions of the space. On those shelves sat dozens of wooden boxes, glass-topped display cases, and cloth-wrapped bundles, each one bearing a small handwritten label. A battery-powered lantern sat on a wooden crate near the stairs. Stella switched it on, and the room came fully into being. She walked to the nearest shelf and looked at a glass-topped case. Inside, rows of coins in protective holders, each with a small tag in careful handwriting. Dates from the 1800s through the middle of the 20th century. American coins, German coins, French, British. She opened the case carefully and examined the closest coin, a mercury dime dated 1916, its surface with a quality that even her untrained eye recognized as exceptional. Clem had moved to the next shelf, where military medals lay in velvet-lined cases. Mom, are these from wars? I think so, a lot of them. Along the far wall, the shelving gave way to a wooden desk, and on the desk sat a row of leather-bound ledgers. Stella lifted the topmost one and opened the cover. The handwriting inside was Rosalind's. The title on the first page read, "Continuation of DeWitt Summerfield's Collection Registry, Volume 12." No, she set that one down and looked for the oldest. At the back of the row, she found it. The leather was cracked with age, the binding rough. She opened it and found different handwriting inside, precise and masculine. The ink faded to a warm brown. DeWitt Summerfield's collection begun 1940. She read the opening entry. I begin this record on the day of my return home. These items are not trophies. They are memories of places, people, and promises, each one representing a life touched by the war, many of those lives now extinguished. I collect not for value, but for remembrance. When memory fails, as it surely will, these objects will speak of what we endured and what we lost. Stella read it twice. Then she read it a third time. She was still holding the ledger when she noticed the loose sheet of paper tucked between two of the middle volumes. She worked it free, carefully. It was a typed document on professional letterhead, a formal appraisal, dated 2017. The name at the bottom was Grover Huxley, Certified Numismatist and Historical Artifacts Specialist. The document assessed only a portion of the collection. Stella read through the individual valuations without fully registering them until she reached the total at the bottom of the page to $100,000. Below that, in Rosalind's handwriting, a margin note. Grover estimates full collection approaching 2.5 million, undocumented pieces and war memorabilia not yet included. The number sat in the quiet of the underground room. Stella sat down on a wooden crate and held the paper and let the number be what it was. All of it had been here, through 2 years of notices from the bank and shifts at the gift shop, and lying awake calculating what she could sell and what she could not afford to sell, and whether there was any version of the math that came out right. All of it had been sitting beneath a locked door in a cabin she had never visited, waiting. "Mum," Clem's hand on her arm. "Are you okay?" "I am, sweetheart. I'm just surprised. Is it a lot of money?" "A very great deal." Clem looked around the room with the frank, appraising gaze of a child who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by practical thinking. "Is that why someone came to the windows last night? Because they knew?" Stella looked at her daughter. "You heard that I thought you were asleep." "I woke up when you took the poker. I pretended to be asleep because I was scared." Stella reached out and pulled Clem against her. The child let herself be held with the particular combination of resistance and relief that children show when they have been frightened and are trying not to show it, and are very glad to be held. "I'm sorry you were scared," Stella said. "And yes, I think someone might know this collection is here." She turned the appraisal over in her hands, and there on the back she saw it. Rosalind's handwriting, smaller than usual, compressed, dense with information. A list of names, 12 of them numbered each with a date and a brief notation. The first entry, dated 2019, Larkin Summerfield. Approached, refused. She read through the list slowly. 11 names, 11 people Rosalind had apparently considered and rejected as potential keepers of the collection. Each one marked refused or declined or not suitable. The 12th name at the bottom of the list had no rejection notation beside it, no date, just a name. Stella Merriweather, the last one. She sat with that for a moment. Outside she could hear Clem moving carefully around the shelves, not touching, just looking the way she had been taught to look at things that mattered. Rosalind had searched for years. She had gone through 11 candidates before settling on Stella. She had never explained any of it. She had simply left a key and a drawing and a note that said, "Trust no one until you know the whole truth." Stella folded the list and the appraisal together and held them in her hands. She knew one thing now that she had not known when she arrived. The cabin was not worthless. Whatever Larkin had told himself, or told Jacinda, or told Kent, over whatever dinner table where this had been discussed and planned, the cabin was not worthless, and had never been worthless, and everyone who needed to know that fact was going to know it very soon. She also knew that whoever had tried the window last night would be back. She took out her phone. No signal. She had expected that. She would have to drive back toward town to make calls. But there was one call she was going to make before anything else. She looked at the name at the bottom of the appraisal, Grover Huxley. I was going to hear from her today. Grover Huxley drove a rust-blue pickup truck that had at least 200,000 miles on it and sounded like every one of them. He was already parked in the clearing when Stella arrived the following morning, standing on the porch with his hands in the pockets of his denim jacket, watching the tree line with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to waiting. I was 70 years old and looked like someone who had spent those years doing physical work that mattered. The white hair was thick and uncombed. The blue eyes beneath the heavy brows were the sharpest thing about him, the eyes of a man who had spent decades looking at small objects very carefully and had transferred that precision to everything else he observed. He turned when he heard Stella's car and studied her for a moment before speaking. "You have Rosalind's eyes," he said. "She told me you would. She told you a lot about me, apparently." "Enough." He held out his hand. "Grover Huxley, I've been waiting for this call since 2017. They went inside and down into the collection room together, and Grover moved through the space the way a person moves through a room they know intimately, adjusting to the changes that time had made without being surprised by the fundamentals." He ran his hand along one shelf with something close to tenderness. He checked the humidity gauge mounted near the stairs, a small mechanical system DeWitt had installed decades ago to control the underground climate, and nodded at what he found. "DeWitt built this room to last," Grover said. "Rosalind kept the maintenance up, temperature and humidity controlled independently from the cabin's main electricity. These pieces have been better preserved than most museum collections." He lifted a display case from the middle shelf and brought it to the desk, opening it under the lantern light with the practiced ease of long familiarity. The Mercury dime series caught the light, each coin in its individual holder, each one tagged in DeWitt's careful handwriting. "The 1916 is exceptional," Grover said, not touching it. "There are perhaps 40 specimens of this quality in private hands in the country, but that's not the point of this collection, and it never was." He set the case down. DeWitt wasn't building a portfolio. He was building a record. Stella had the list in her hand. The 12 names. She placed it on the desk between them. Grover looked at it. He did not seem surprised. "She showed you the back," he said. "What was she looking for in those 11 people before me?" Grover was quiet for a moment, turning the question over. Someone who would understand that the value was in keeping it whole, every one of those 11 people, when they found out what this collection was worth, immediately started talking about which pieces to sell first, which ones could be moved quietly, which ones had the best market. He paused. Rosalind would end the conversation at that point, every time. How did she know I would be different? Grover looked at her steadily. She didn't know. She hoped. Kelvin gave her reasons to hope. The name hit Stella the way Kelvin's name still sometimes did, with a physical quality, a shift in the air pressure of the room. Kelvin knew about this, she said. It was not a question. She had already found the shape of it the night before lying awake in Rosalind's cabin with the documents in her hands. For the last 2 years of his life he spent time out here with Rosalind. He told you he was fishing with friends. He told me he was fishing with friends. Grover picked up one of the smaller ledgers from the desk and set it back down without opening it. Rosalind asked him to keep it quiet until she decided what she wanted to do. He honored that. But he talked about you constantly. He told her about the time a customer at the gift shop wanted to throw out a box of his late wife's things, and you spent 3 weeks tracking down the man's daughter in Oregon to make sure the items went to the right person. Grover looked at her. That's the story that convinced Rosalind you were the right choice. Stella stood with that for a moment. Kelvin had known. He had been here in this room looking at these same shelves, understanding something about her family's history that she herself had not yet been trusted with, and he had been waiting for the right time to bring her here, and the right time had never come. She felt it not as grief exactly, but as something adjacent to grief, the particular ache of a door that had been standing open all along, that she had simply never been shown. "What did Larkin do?" she said when Rosalind refused him. Grover's expression changed. Not anger, something colder than anger. He hired a lawyer and attempted to have Rosalind declared mentally incompetent. He found a physician willing to write an evaluation suggesting cognitive decline. Rosalind found out about it before the filing was complete because she still had friends in this county who told her things. She came to me and we spent 3 days documenting everything: her mental state, the collection's provenance, the history of DeWitt's acquisition methods. She hired her own attorney and had a full neurological workup done at the hospital in Pittsburgh. He picked up a coin from the desk and set it down. The evaluation came back clear. Sharp as ever, the neurologist wrote. Rosalind framed that page and hung it in her bedroom. He paused. She also made sure Sheriff Tatum knew what Larkin had attempted, and she updated her will. Before Stella could respond, she heard tires on the gravel. Through the small basement window, she could see nothing, but Grover had already moved toward the stairs with a quickness that his age did not predict. Sheriff Ray Tatum's voice carried down from the main room a minute later. "Grover, it's Ray. Door was open." They came upstairs to find Tatum standing in the cabin's main room with his hat in his hands, taking in the evidence of Stella's partial unpacking with the quiet observation of a man trained to read spaces. He was 56. The salt and pepper of his hair cut close his face, the color of someone who spent considerable time outdoors and had never particularly cared about that fact. He looked at Stella the way someone looks at a person they have heard about and are now measuring against the description. "Mrs. Merriweather," he said, "good to finally meet you. Rosalind talked about you." Everyone apparently talked to Rosalind about me, except Rosalind. Something shifted in Tatum's expression, not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. "That sounds right." He turned the hat in his hands once. I called Grover this morning because I have some information you need to hear, and I'd rather you heard it from me than from someone with an interest in how you react." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and spread it on the dining table. It was a map of the county with several parcels outlined in red marker. Larkin Summerfield has been in contact with a development group called Ridgeview Partners for the last 8 months. I know this because the county planning office has been receiving preliminary inquiries about the Pine Hollow Valley for 6 months, and the name attached to those inquiries is Kent Farrow, who is the principal of Ridgeview Partners, and the local contact facilitating those inquiries is Larkin Summerfield. Tatum placed his finger on the map. Ridgeview has been acquiring land throughout this valley, 17 separate parcels in the last 2 years. Their stated intention is a high-end resort development, the kind that takes 3 years to build and changes the character of a region permanently. He moved his finger. This parcel here is the Summerfield property, 5 acres around the cabin plus 10 acres extending north to the ridge. It sits at the geographic center of every other parcel they've acquired. Without it, the development cannot proceed. Every other piece of land they've purchased becomes significantly less valuable. He looked at Stella. Larkin has known about this project for at least 8 months, possibly longer. His interest in challenging Rosalind's will and gaining control of this property has nothing to do with family sentiment and everything to do with a real estate transaction that requires this land. Stella looked at the map. The red parcels surrounded the Summerfield property on every side like a hand closing slowly around something it intended to hold. "And the collection," she said. "If he invalidates the will and takes control of the estate, the collection becomes part of the split between himself and Jacinda, 2/3 controlled by Larkin. He could sell it before any legal protection is in place." Tatum folded the map carefully. "There's one more thing. 2 nights before Rosalind died, she called me at 11 in the evening. She told me that Larkin had visited her house that afternoon. She said, 'Ray, if anything happens to me, I want you to remember that Larkin was here today.' I thought she was anxious, an old woman worried about her health." He put the map back in his pocket. "I don't think that anymore." The 3 adults stood in the quiet cabin for a moment, with the weight of what Tatum had just said settling into the room. Then tires on the gravel again. A single vehicle, moving with a deliberate speed that was not the hesitant approach of someone uncertain of their destination. Larkin Summerfield's black SUV pulled into the clearing. Stella was on the porch before she had consciously decided to move. She heard Grover behind her and felt Tatum beside her, but she was the one who stood at the top of the porch steps when Larkin climbed out of the driver's side. He saw Tatum first. Something crossed his face very briefly, an adjustment, a recalculation. Then he put on the expression he had prepared for a different situation and climbed the steps. "Stella," he said warmly, "good you're here. I hoped I would catch you. You were told yesterday that this wasn't a good time." He paused 1 step below the porch level, which put his eyes even with hers. "I know, and I apologize for that, but I have a time-sensitive matter. There are some business documents Rosalind kept out here, records that affect some family financial matters, nothing of personal value to you, but important to sort out properly." "What kind of business documents?" Larkin's warmth did not flicker. He had spent 30 years in real estate negotiations. He knew how to hold a position. "Just old records, property filings, some correspondence." Shouldn't take long to locate if I could just have a few minutes at her desk. There's no desk in the cabin, Stella said. She watched him process this. He knew it was a lie. She knew it was a lie. The lie was not the point. The lie was a line drawn in the gravel between them. Stella! His voice dropped to the register of a man speaking privately, family to family, in confidence. Rosalind was not well in her final years. We both know that. Whatever you found here, whatever she told you this place contained, you need to consider the possibility that her judgment about its importance was not reliable. Rosalind's neurologist disagreed with you, Tatum said from behind Stella's shoulder. Larkin looked at Tatum with an expression that managed to combine respect for the badge with complete dismissal of the man. Ray, this is a family matter. It's my jurisdiction, Tatum said simply. Larkin looked at Stella for a long moment. The warmth was still there in his expression, but there was something beneath it now that he was no longer working to conceal. The patience of someone who has other options and is willing to use them. Property taxes on 15 acres in this county run about $4,000 a year, he said. I know what you earn at that gift shop, Stella. Think about that. He walked back to his car. He did not hurry. He reversed out of the clearing with the careful control of a man who does not wish to appear angry, and the sound of his engine faded into the trees. Stella stood on the porch and realized she had been holding Rosalind's iron key in her fist for the entire conversation. She did not remember taking it from her pocket. He knew about the floor, she said. Tatum turned to look at her. When he mentioned the desk, he knew where to go. He's been in this cabin before, not recently, but he knows the layout. She looked at the porch boards. He knows something about the collection, not everything, but enough to know there's something here worth pursuing. The afternoon brought the attorney, Annalise Calloway, arrived with a briefcase and a directness that Stella found immediately reassuring. She was in her mid-40s, with the efficient manner of someone who had spent years cutting through complicated situations to the legal core of them. She spread documents on the dining table and outlined the situation with professional precision. Larkin had already filed a petition challenging Rosalind's will. The grounds were mental incompetence and undue influence. He had Darla's statement, the physician's evaluation, and 2 affidavits from distant relatives suggesting Rosalind had been confused in her final months. Against this, Annalise had Rosalind's neurological evaluation from the Pittsburgh hospital 3 months before her death. She had Grover's documentation. She had Sheriff Tatum's 20 years of observations, and she had potentially the collection itself as evidence of Rosalind's sustained clarity and purposefulness. The development angle is important, Annalise said, clicking her pen against her legal pad. If we can establish that Larkin's challenge is motivated by financial interest in the land, rather than genuine concern for Rosalind's estate, we significantly undermine his credibility with the court. She looked at Stella directly. There's a second track we should pursue simultaneously, historical preservation designation. If we can establish the collection as a historically significant artifact, which Grover's preliminary assessment already supports, we can petition for protected status that would prevent the collection from being divided or sold, regardless of how the will challenge resolves. How long does that take? Emergency petition, given the active threat, possibly a week for temporary status. That night, the text messages started. The first arrived at 11:15. A number Stella did not recognize. Certain parties interested in collection. Discreet arrangement possible. No documentation required. 7 figures. She stared at it for a long time before blocking the number. 40 minutes later, a second message from a different number. Property alone worth 500,000. To write developer recommend considering options before situation becomes complicated. She was still awake, sitting in the armchair by the cold fireplace, when the motion-activated lights outside blazed on. She was at the window before the lights had been on for 3 seconds. 2 shapes in the clearing. One she recognized immediately from the security light's harsh illumination, the sharp Summerfield jaw visible even at distance on a young face. Val, Jacinda's son, 26 years old, someone Stella had met twice at family gatherings and had barely registered. The other figure was larger, dressed entirely in dark clothing, moving with the professional confidence of someone who had done this before. They were not attempting subtlety. They had tools. Stella crossed the room to Clem's door in 4 steps. Her daughter was awake, sitting up in bed, eyes wide and dark in the half-light. "There are people outside," Stella said, her voice low and steady. "We're going downstairs. Right now. Bring your flashlight." Clem was out of bed without a word. She grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and her jacket from the chair and took her mother's hand. They moved through the dark cabin to the trapdoor. Stella unlocked the star panel and lifted the floor section, and they went down, and Stella pulled the door closed above them and engaged the interior locks that Grover had installed just 2 days before. From below they listened. The front door gave. The new deadbolt held for 90 seconds before the mechanism yielded to whatever was being applied to it from outside. Footsteps entered the cabin above, 2 sets, moving with purpose, not randomly. Drawers opening, cases being lifted. The particular sound of glass breaking one case and then another, not carelessly but systematically, the way someone moves through a space when they have a list. Clem pressed against Stella's side in the dark. Stella had her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and she could feel Clem's breathing, controlled, deliberate, the breathing of a child who was frightened and was managing it because she had already learned that panic costs more than it buys. Then the sound changed, a metallic scraping against the wood directly above their heads, someone working a pry bar into the trapdoor's edge. The bolts Grover had installed held, but the wood groaned under the pressure. They would not hold forever. Clem's flashlight moved, not toward the stairs, toward the opposite wall. "Mom," Clem whispered, "the other door." Stella turned. She had registered the narrow door in the stone wall on their first descent, had assumed it was a utility space or a storage closet, and had not investigated further. Now Clem's light caught its outline clearly, a door-shaped seam in the stone, the same concealment technique DeWitt had used everywhere in this structure. The prying above intensified. The trapdoor shuddered. Stella crossed to the door and pushed, stiff but not locked. It swung inward on a breath of cool earth smell, revealing a passage barely wide enough for an adult. She took the flashlight from Clem and went first. The tunnel ran straight for 30 feet through packed earth and stone before turning upward. A wooden ladder with iron rungs climbed a vertical shaft to a hatch at the top. Stella went up first, pushed against the hatch, felt resistance, shifted her weight and pushed harder. Wood scraped against wood. Something heavy above the hatch shifted. She pushed again with everything she had. The hatch opened. Starlight, cold air, the smell of pine and wood smoke from the cold cabin chimney. She had emerged inside the woodshed at the back of the property, beside a stack of split logs that had been piled over the hatch, concealing it from above. She reached down and helped Clem up through the opening, and they stood together in the dark woodshed while through the cabin windows the moving lights of the two men were still visible, still searching. They did not speak. Stella moved Clem toward the tree line, away from the cabin, away from the clearing where the vehicles were parked, into the forest, onto the path they had found that first afternoon, the overgrown trail leading toward the ruins of the original homestead. Clem ran without being told. Her small legs moved through the dark with a sureness that surprised Stella, as though the child had already decided this was something she could do and had simply done it. Behind them, a shout from the cabin. The trapdoor had been breached. They were already in the trees. The path was difficult in the dark roots and low branches, finding every step, but Stella kept her hand on Clem's shoulder and the flashlight low against the ground, and they moved through the forest until the cabin lights were gone behind them, and only the sound of their breathing remained. The clearing with the old foundation appeared ahead, the crumbled stone wall pale in the moonlight. Stella went directly to the concrete slab that Tatum had pointed out during their first afternoon walk, the one disguised as foundation stone, the rusted ring set into its surface. She gripped the ring and pulled. The slab shifted, shifted again, lifted with the grinding protest of something that had not been moved in years. They went down into the dark. Stella lowered the slab back into place above them, and the night vanished, and the sounds of the forest vanished, and they were in a different kind of silence, stone and earth, and the smell of old cedar, and the particular stillness of a sealed space. Clem found Stella's arm in the dark. She was breathing hard from the run. She did not cry. They sat on the dirt floor, backs against the stone wall, the flashlight on its lowest setting, and they listened to nothing. After 20 minutes, Stella was certain no footsteps were following. After 30, she was certain they had not been tracked. Clem found the photo albums on the shelf in the dark, the same way she had found everything in this family, by reaching for it when the moment required. She opened one in her lap and held the flashlight over it. Black and white photographs, generations of the Summerfield family, recorded in a space no one outside the family had ever known about. DeWitt and Colette as young people, Rosalind as a small child, held in her father's arms on the porch of the cabin above. A series of family Christmases spanning 50 years. And in the final pages, photographs that were not old at all, Stella's parents at a backyard gathering. Stella herself, maybe 16, sitting on a porch. Kelvin holding infant Clem, squinting into summer sun. Rosalind had been updating this archive. She had kept bringing the family forward into the record, even as the family stopped coming to find her. She kept putting us in here, Clem said, even when we didn't visit. Stella looked at her daughter's face in the low light. Clem was looking at a photograph of Kelvin with something steady and clear in her expression, something that was not grief, but was shaped like it from the inside out. She kept the whole family in here, Stella said. All of us. Because that's what it's for, Clem said, so people don't get forgotten. Stella looked at her 8-year-old daughter holding a flashlight over a photograph of her dead father in an underground room beneath a ruined cabin in the Pennsylvania woods, and felt something shift in her chest that she did not have a word for. not grief, not relief, something that was both of those things simultaneously and was also something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps, the specific feeling of finally being in the right place. She reached into the folder she had brought down with her, the folder with Rosalind's documents, and found the envelope she had been carrying since the second day at the cabin, the one with Kelvin's name on it in Rosalind's handwriting. She had been carrying it for 4 days without opening it. She opened it now. Inside a letter from Rosalind to Kelvin, dated 18 months before his accident. Paper clipped to it a second letter in Kelvin's handwriting on notebook paper, his reply to Rosalind. The envelope was addressed, stamped and sealed. He had never mailed it. He had died before he found the right time. She read it by flashlight in the underground dark, and Kelvin's voice came to her from the page so clearly that she had to stop twice and simply hold the paper and breathe. Dear Rosalind, he had written, thank you for trusting me with the story of DeWitt's collection. I understand now why you've protected it all these years. I'm waiting for the right time to bring Stella and Clem out here. Stella needs to understand where she comes from. She needs to see this. When I bring her, I think she's going to sit down on those old cabin stairs and not be able to stand back up for about an hour, because that's what Stella does when something is genuinely true. She stops and she lets it be true. I've been watching for the right time. I'll know it when I see it. Your friend Kelvin. Before climbing back up to the surface, Stella used the small key clipped inside the envelope's back fold on the hidden compartment in DeWitt's desk, and what she found there, she closed away again carefully, not yet ready to carry everything at once. Clem leaned against her shoulder in the dark, and after a while she slept, and Stella sat with the letter in her hands and the sound of the forest above, and the stone walls around her, and she understood that she had been brought here across years of planning by people who loved her and were no longer present to see her arrive. But they had known she would. They had trusted that she would. She stayed awake until the gray of early morning began to show around the edges of the concrete slab. Then she woke Clem gently, and they climbed back up into the world, and the clearing was empty, and the cabin in the distance showed the open front door and the aftermath of the night's damage through its windows. Stella took out her phone, one bar of signal at the edge of the tree line. She called Tatum first, then she called Grover. Then she stood in the morning air with Clem beside her, both of them looking at the cabin that DeWitt Summerfield had built 77 years ago with his own hands and his own reasons, and she felt the cold and the adrenaline and the exhaustion, and underneath all of those things something she had not felt in 2 years' absolute certainty about where she was standing and why. Val's car was gone. The men were gone, but they had left evidence, and they had left the collection's most visible pieces missing from their shelves. And when Annalise Calloway arrived within the hour and walked through the underground room, making notes, she turned to Stella with the focused expression of someone who has just watched a complicated situation simplify itself. They made a mistake, Annalise said. They took things that can be traced. That, and they handed us the emergency preservation petition on a silver plate. Annalise looked around the damaged room. A collection under active threat of theft, an ongoing campaign to invalidate the will of a woman whose mental clarity has been documented by a board-certified neurologist, a real estate developer with a documented financial interest in the property. She closed her notebook. The hearing is scheduled for Thursday. Be ready to testify. Stella looked at the empty display case where the Mercury dime series had been the velvet impression of the coins still visible in the lining. She picked up DeWitt's first ledger from the desk where it had been left undisturbed, the one from 1945, and held it against her chest. "Thursday," she said. The courtroom in Harwick's County Courthouse smelled of old wood and central heating and the particular staleness of a room where difficult things were decided on a regular basis. It was a modest space, nothing like the grand federal courtrooms Stella had seen in photographs, just a low-ceilinged room with fluorescent lights and wooden benches that had been refinished too many times, and a judge's bench that sat perhaps 2 feet above the floor. But the flag stood in the corner, and the seal hung on the wall, and the woman behind the bench had the authority to determine what happened to everything Rosalind Summerfield had spent her life protecting. Judge Margaret Ostrander was 63 years old, with steel gray hair cut practically short, and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and put on and removed with the unconscious rhythm of someone who had been doing it for decades. She reviewed the documents before her with the unhurried attention of a person who understood that speed and thoroughness were not the same thing, and that the second one mattered more. Larkin sat at the petitioner's table with his attorney, a man named Grayson, who wore a suit that cost more than Stella's monthly mortgage payment and had the smooth prepared manner of someone who billed by the hour and was never in a hurry. Jacinda sat beside Larkin in a charcoal jacket, with her hands folded on the table, her face composed in an expression that Stella could not read from across the room. Annalise sat beside Stella at the respondent's table, with 3 inches of organized documentation and the focused stillness of someone who had been here many times before and knew exactly what she intended to do. Clem was not in the courtroom. She was with Grover in the parking lot, sitting in the bed of his old pickup truck with a bag of peanut butter crackers and a field guide to Pennsylvania birds that Grover had produced from behind his seat with the matter-of-fact generosity of a man who understood what 8-year-olds needed when adults were busy with serious things. Grayson presented his case first. He called Darla, who testified with evident discomfort about the 2 occasions she had observed Rosalind seeming uncertain in the gift shop. Under Annalise's cross-examination, Darla acknowledged that Rosalind had been 91 years old at the time that she had driven herself to the shop unassisted, and that the uncertainty she described could reasonably be attributed to a woman of advanced age deciding between greeting card options. Darla left the stand looking at the floor. Grayson called the physician next. The man had spent 20 minutes with Rosalind 7 months before her death and had written an evaluation suggesting cognitive decline. Annalise spent 15 minutes with him on cross, and by the end of it he had conceded that he had not reviewed Rosalind's complete medical history, had not spoken with her primary care physician, and had been referred to Rosalind by Larkin Summerfield's office rather than encountering her through any normal medical channel. The evaluation did not look like medicine after that. It looked like paperwork. Then Annalise stood and called Grover Huxley. Grover walked to the stand without hurrying, settled himself in the chair, and answered Annalise's questions about Rosalind with the particular authority of someone who had known a person through work rather than through social obligation. He described 15 years of collaboration on the collection. He described Rosalind's meticulous maintenance of the preservation systems, her detailed additions to the registry volumes, her careful research into the provenance of pieces, DeWitt had not fully documented. He described a conversation from 8 months before her death, in which Rosalind had walked him through a complex legal arrangement she had made with her attorney to protect the collection from what she called external pressure, and had explained every element of it with complete clarity. In your professional assessment, Annalise asked, was Rosalind Summerfield capable of making sound decisions about her estate and its contents? She was one of the most capable people I have known professionally, Grover said, and I have known a great many people professionally. Grayson cross-examined Grover with the careful attention of a man trying to find a thread he could pull without unraveling his own case. He did not find one. Then Annalise said the name that changed the temperature of the room. Dolph Mercer came through the courtroom door on his polished wooden cane, moving with the deliberate care of a man who had learned to conserve energy across 94 years of using it. He wore a dark suit that fit him as though it had been purchased when he was 30 pounds heavier and had been taken in by someone who knew what they were doing. On the lapel, 3 medals that Stella now recognized from DeWitt's documentation: the Bronze Star, the Combat Infantryman Badge, and a unit citation from the 29th Infantry Division. The courtroom was quiet in a different way when he sat down. Even Grayson's posture changed slightly. Dolph looked at Annalise and waited. "Mr. Mercer," Annalise said, "can you describe your relationship with DeWitt?"